Hello and welcome to Cultivate. We have a very special guest today. His name's Scott Holden, and he owns CBD Global Extracts, to name one of his many companies. And the reason I'm having him on is because, of course, there is so much information out there that is incorrect on CBD. And he has started a cartoon series to address how many silly products are on the market to hopefully educate the consumer. That's one. Two, he's one of the longest running CBD companies. He's been in the business since 2012, really hitting it in 2013. And so without giving all the information, welcome, Scott. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. Really happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's talk about how you got into cannabis. Your story is phenomenal.
Yeah, it was an unexpected one for myself. I think that's true for a lot of people that get into this space, at least a lot of the folks that I've met that continue to stick around. Everyone seems to have a unique story. I was in software. I come from over 11 years in enterprise software. I worked for an IBM business partner for a fairly large Department of Defense companies doing audits on their people, process, and tools. And then I took in the CEO position for a software company. In addition to that, I was kind of deciding to do a transition anyhow, and I got into cryptography, into blockchain technology, and that was applied more towards mobile encrypted communications. And after I had left my corporate position to take that position, I, within 1 week, found out that my father had been diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia, CMML. So, that was tough, like it is for everybody, to find that out about a close family member. And I didn't sleep for a couple of weeks. And I just kept doing research, looking up every alternative I could find to chemotherapy and radiation. The prognosis was about 18 months that we had been given after bone marrow transplant would have been done. And I had looked into every African root, bark, herb, Chinese medicine that you can think of. Through all the research, a lot of arrows kept pointing back to cannabis. And this is before a lot of the research was done.
Yeah, 100%.
There was already an overwhelming amount of information, far more than I had realized. So I opened the conversation with my father. It took a long time. I'll make it brief, but eventually he came back around and said, I'm willing to give this a shot. So prior to starting chemo, he told me, you have 3 months. I'm going on a bike trip into Europe, and whatever you got, throw it at me. I scrambled to go through my networks of people. And the reason I had a network of people when coming from software was that I actually started a side business in California in extraction before the industry really even started. I realized quickly that the oil that went into vaporizers was far more valuable than the vaporizers themselves, which were commodities. So through that, I knew about extraction. I had been running hydrocarbon extractions, which with a guy who was very helpful getting me into this industry, who you know well, Matthew Ellis, the owner and CEO of Extraction Tech Solutions in Denver. And I had the first machine, the first prototype of his, and we took it to California and started using it. So I ended up going to the people that I knew and getting my hands on a very rare strain. And this was before anyone even heard about Charlotte's Web.
Sure, yeah, or CBD for that matter.
Or CBD. And he had to work, so I needed to make sure that we found something that was non-intoxicating for him. And that's why I went for the non-THC solutions, and also because the research I had done shown that the concentration of CB2 receptors were what was predominant on bone marrow within the bones, in the internal organs. It wasn't his central nervous system or peripheral dermis, so that's what I was looking for, CBD. And we ended up getting our hands on a very, very potent strain. In first phase extraction, it was over 75% CBD and only around 2% THC. Since then, strains have, that's pretty common these days, but back then it was unheard of. started to make something with for him, and since then that formulation has evolved in very big ways. And we've even gone out and customized them for very different forms of conditions that people have. I'll leave it at that. There's not a whole lot we say other than give this a shot.
Right.
Besides that, when he came back to his oncologist's office, they wanted to start him right away, but he demanded a CBC blood test.
Okay.
That was in California, and it was at Stanford Oncology Ward, and to this day they have not released that blood test. So
Really?
they basically told him if they wanted to be monitored by them that he would have to be on their regimen and their regimen only. So he ended up leaving them, and he had to find an allopathic physician who would agree without providing the drugs that they wanted to do blood tests on him to monitor him.
Of course.
And he did. He eventually did do that. And there's a series of things that he tried on and off. He did something called Vidaza, which was not a full-blown chemo. It was an experimental version of it. And nobody had had, I am jumping forward, nobody had had the success that he ended up having today. But he ended up toggling back and then sticking with the cannabis. And today he'll tell people what his experience was and what happens when he doesn't take it. He takes it every single day. He takes it every evening and every morning. And that was 8 years ago. So he's as happy, as healthy as he's ever been. And it's the biggest blessing my family could ever have. And to anybody out there who's considering it, it's a very difficult decision. It's a leap of faith you have to take together. And it's scary because, you know, you sit into a position where you feel like you'll never forgive yourself if things go sideways and you led them astray. But we're very happy we made that decision, and he'll tell everyone today that if he misses a few days, he feels completely different.
That is fascinating.
So it's more of a maintenance situation for him. It's not something that was taken and then he stopped and, you know, he's off.
Right.
He continues to take it, and it balances his body. So,
and what is his maintenance?
He's taken a high potency sublingual dropper under the tongue. He has 2 different formulations. The cannabinoids are concentrated differently.
Okay.
That's one of the things that we do specialize in as a company. We can talk about that a little bit later. But he has very high concentrations in a tiny 10 ml. Started off as a 7. There's over 3,000 milligrams in it.
Ooh, wow. Okay.
Now, I'm not promoting for every situation that high dose is best, because that's not true. In some cases it is. And so he has a very, you know, his body is full of cannabinoids, but for some reason, the combination of terpenes, cannabinoids, and the concentrations that we have them, and there is different concentrations of CBD, CBG, CBC, CBDV, CBL, and the terpenes that we use are all very much oncology specific. And so on top of that, we have a series of botanicals that are in there, like astaxanthin. We actually have next to our farms, our cannabis farms in Prague in the Czech Republic. The groups that we work with out there actually have a couple football fields of glass walls stacked of red algae that produce astaxanthin. And then we flush the system, and then you concentrate it down to an oleoresin of high concentration. And that's known as one of the most powerful antioxidants on the planet. So black cumin seed oil is in there, which has been used by Arabic countries for hundreds, if not thousands of years to fight cancer. Avocado seed oil, primrose, there's a whole list of things.
Well, and that's why we're talking today, because you have set yourself so differently. You have taken a science approach from the very beginning. Your farms are heavily regulated. You work with universities there. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So when I started, before the company was even incorporated, I wanted to focus on research because that's really what started it. Not sleeping and doing research. But I needed access to facilities. I needed access to people who were smarter than me, who had done other research. And so I started literally picking up the phone and calling people. And the first place I started was my alumni. I called the professors at University of Colorado, where I went to school. I studied in the biology and biochemistry department there. So I wasn't flying completely blind. I knew some things to look for, and I understood reading papers. I understand how to read scientific papers. And I started seeing what they were doing. Very quickly, I met Nolan Kane. Very quickly, I met Dr. Ken Hutchinson, Daniel Vergas. I met Bob Sievers, and the list goes on. And there are people already doing animal PK studies, pharmacokinetics. Bob was playing with all types of interesting applications through powderization, versions of micronization, nano, powder inhalation. So we started getting along very early. And then, Nolan was getting into the genetics. And that was interesting to me because I had actually started a project simultaneously to me reaching out to them around genetics on cannabis. And I was not, it's very important to do typical Mendelian breeding, but that was too slow for me. And I wanted to speed things up. So I started to find locations where we could do genome sequencing. And once we established the sequence of several different species, from there, I wanted to identify the alleles that the genes of interest were located on, and we did. A lot of that research came out of Israel, and we identified the location of several of the primary cannabinoids and what their amino acid sequences were. Once we could find them, then we could manipulate them. And I want to be clear about something. I am okay with genetic engineering to a point. There's a big misconception in the population where anything that touches the genes of a plant means GMO. That's actually not how GMO is defined.
Oh, okay.
It has to do with the introduction of transgenics, and that means foreign DNA that codes for something.
Okay.
Manipulating DNA, meaning like red and green light on and off switches.
Right.
These are things that you can still do within a genome, and it's not considered GMO. Not by the FDA, not by the Department of Agriculture. By the general population, like Urban Dictionary, we have our own definitions for things, but
of course we do.
Those are the technical definitions.
Right.
But it doesn't code for anything. But what that would allow us to do is potentially amplify certain of the expression of certain phenotypes like cannabinoids, and mute, if not turn off, the expression of others. And the one that I was interested in was shutting off THCA synthase. So that was a project that started very early on, and it took a lot of time over the years to move it forward. Other people have also played with CRISPR technology. The reason ours was different is because I had gotten an agreement with a company that actually owned a CRISPR technology, because a lot of people can...
CRISPR technology, back up.
Okay, CRISPR technology is basically kind of like Cas9. It allows you to work with certain plasmid vectors, which in biology will be used to insert themselves into a genetic sequence. Okay. Now that's how you introduce foreign DNA. But what we can do is actually go in and do a SNP and cut a gene.
Wow.
And so we can remove the expression of the THCA synthase sequence, and then the organism will express like it would normally, just without that phenotype. So that would allow us to have very high producing, non-intoxicating strains. And it would lower the acquisition cost of these APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, because we wouldn't have to go through as much of the post-processing, like THC remediation.
Right.
Remediation didn't show up into the industry until 2016 on the early side. 17 people started to get really interested.
Right.
We were looking at overcoming this back in 2013. And that project moved forward in several ways. And it wasn't, we used gene gun editing, chemical mutagenesis, and then agrobacteria mediated transformation. The last is the most effective, but it's the hardest to do. The cannabis species is an extremely brilliant, amazing plant. There are those who think it's not from this planet. It does not behave like other organisms.
No, it does not.
It's very intelligent. It seems to hold epigenetic memory from prior generations, and it can respond accordingly into new environments. There's a lot of research on that that's been done. And it's very difficult to penetrate those cell walls. So doing anything with that plant from a genetic standpoint is not as easy as your model organisms like tobacco or other things that are commonly used in genetic engineering. So that project still continues, but then apart from that, I was interested in patient monitoring, blood analysis. These are all really important topics because what I didn't want to do was just arbitrarily make things and throw them at people.
No way.
There's not enough time. There wasn't enough. I didn't have the resources, and there was too many limitations legally of what can be done. In the United States, you're very limited on the type of human studies that you can do, and most of it is animal studies in mice. And so there was a lot of benefit that I got from working out of the country. Now, that wasn't the first driver. Let me be clear about that. The first driver was both economic and being forced. Now, this is before the Farm Bill.
Right.
So there was no cultivation in the United States.
No.
I didn't have a choice but to go abroad.
Right.
China was the first place. I'm very comfortable admitting it.
Right.
They are the world's largest producer of hemp. So, you know, Canada, the combination of Canada, the United States, and Europe are now starting to rival that, but still, the landmass is huge, and they've been doing it for a long time. The history of the CBD industry is an interesting one. We don't have time to go into it. Maybe another time we can get together.
100%. Yeah.
It actually, unfortunately, does have a dark history. A lot of nefarious individuals were involved in the first imports coming into the country. And most people don't know that the very first CBD isolate to enter was a synthetic.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So we still have some of it in quarantine. We show people, and we've even done tests on it to look for residue biomarkers to show people how it is possible sometimes to test between a synthetic and a natural. That aside, the main reasons I left was because they have no environmental laws, they have no labor laws. I couldn't get the documentation that I wanted, and it was extremely important to me. Not just because the foresight of knowing that this industry was going to be grabbed by two hands by regulators, and it would have been a tough process to figure out how are we going to regulate this.
Right.
Everyone knew it would come at some point. But it had to do with more of the fact that the first person that I was helping was my father.
Right.
And he had a compromised immune system. And so that set the stage for everything that I did from that point forward to keep as the background of my, process in my mind and my thought on anything that I did, that we need to be very, very scrutinous of the materials that we're using here. We need to test everything and make sure that, we're providing something that's clean. And I didn't trust anything from China. And I had good reason not to, because when we did test things, we found a lot of problems. We ended up landing in Prague in the Czech Republic after a number of things, but it was a great place to land because the group that I work with there, which is my current exclusive partnership, operates out of the Academy of Sciences of the Institute of Chemicals and Fundamentals. They are a university. They also have a Schedule I controlled substance license. So they're very, very tightly organized with the authorities out there, and our lead lab manager, it's a terrible title for him because he's so much more qualified than that. He's the deputy of chemistry at the Institute. He is the point of contact for their Ministry of Health, their DEA equivalent. And anybody who wants to do extraction in that country needs to have his signature on their application.
Got it. Okay. So he's the gatekeeper.
He is the gatekeeper in a lot of ways. And so it was very beneficial to work with them. And there was mutual benefits that we could provide each other at the time. And I spent a lot of work helping them to establish chain of custody documentation in order to get it set up in a manner that would protect us in the future. And it did in a big way. And that was the inception of what today is operating as cannabis transparency standards.
Which I have it up right now. You can go to cbdglobalextracts.com, and they are, you guys are so transparent. I mean, just the information you're sharing today, you know, people barely share, right, their health and safety test results, not your potency. And you created this seal of approval, if you will, when? I mean, it was years ago.
2014.
2014.
Yeah.
We talked about it because, you know, I wanted to kind of do the same thing with CanLabs.
Yes, yes.
We created a seal as well. But you have a plethora of documentation that I have not seen. And also, when did you start working with CBG? I mean,
CBG, we brought to the US market in 2015, very early on. And just last year in 2019, did you see people talking about it in the United States?
Right.
And it's interesting and unfortunate because, you know, a lot of folks, they get excited, they want to go on to the next thing. What's the new crop? We flooded the industry with CBD.
What's next?
What's next? What else can we monetize? And there's a great deal of people who want to use it for its therapeutic benefits. The problem is people made very tough economic decisions in their product development strategy because everybody raced to the bottom on price without other differentiators. And you ended up in this market where everyone was building the bedrock of their marketing campaigns around, I'm going to say this, this is actually a bad word in our office, full spectrum.
Thank God.
We don't use it because it has no real meaning, and it has many different meanings. So if it has too many different meanings, there's no one standardized meaning.
Right.
And that's a problem because when you communicate between vendors and customers, clients and consumers, everyone uses the term, but nobody knows what they're talking about. So how do you know what you're getting? And
Zero THC, isolate, whole plant medicine, full spectrum.
it means 100 different things, sometimes illegal amounts of THC. I'm shocked that LinkedIn looks like it's become the new Silk Road. People are advertising illicit substances, 5% THC in these extracts. That's not legal.
Nope.
And so you don't really know what you're getting. The consumer doesn't know. They say, oh no, it now means it's below 0.3. Okay, but that's just THC. What is full about it?
Right.
What is it full of?
What?
You are.
I hope you say that.
And that's one of our cartoons. If you go to, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but that's one of the cartoons we created to bring some levity to these tough subjects. And it's, so we brought CBG in as one of the first other cannabinoids in order to start the path of pursuing what today we call target response formulations with controlled spectrum. And controlled really just means that we're standardizing these products. So you get the same exact thing every time, is to the best of our abilities. I'm not saying these are not just a combination of isolates. We absolutely work with whole plant as a base, and then we analyze it and we build on top of that. We build on top of it and we standardize the ratios and we change them. Throwing everything in the kitchen sink in is not the best approach.
Trash in, trash out.
This is a fallacy in the industry.
It is.
Throw more in and it's always better. It's just, it expresses a poor understanding of pharmacology and pharmacokinetics. So when you operate with these receptors, they don't work the same, and the cannabinoids don't bind the same.
Right.
You have full agonists with our synthetics, partial agonists with our the natural cannabinoids. They're partial because the body needs the ability to modulate itself. A full agonist sometimes reduces its ability to modulate, and so it has some bad side effects like we see with synthetic cannabinoids.
Right.
You have
including death. Let me add that in.
Yes,
including death.
it's happened.
Yep.
The receptor has two sites, the orthosteric site, which is the primary, it has the secondary, which is the allosteric site, and cannabinoids interact with both of them. And when you bind to one, most people, so a cannabinoid receptor is a protein embedded in the cell surface, in the lipid bilayer. When you bind on one site, it creates what's called a conformation change.
Right.
And so everything has certain levels of polarity, and so the protein will shift its structure. That can cause a blockage, or meaning the block doesn't fit into the square hole
Right.
anymore.
Right.
And so, you have positive allosteric modulators, negative allosteric modulators, neutral modulators, inverse modulators. When you add cannabinoids together, they interact differently depending on the concentration and which ones are present. Without paying attention to this, you don't realize sometimes that you may be putting things into your product that are having a counterproductive response. And one of the best examples of this in current context with the interest in CBN cannabinol these days, because
Yep.
of sedative effects for sleep,
Yep.
is that they're combining that with CBD. And a lot of times, THC helps with certain things. It's not true that it helps with everything. There's instances when it absolutely does. And THC, a small amount, can very much activate the effects of CBN.
Yes.
And that can even happen below the 0.3 threshold in a little way. The problem with adding CBD in there is CBD is a negative allosteric modulator of THC.
Okay.
So it can block the binding, and that helps amplify the effects of CBN, which means you're competing.
Right.
So there's situations where they don't always help each other, and studying that is crucial. It's important. There's a lot more research that needs to be done, but there's enough out there that can be utilized by manufacturers for formulation, and that's what we focus on.
Yeah, and that's a key thing, because very few of these companies are doing research, these CBD companies, very few. And like you said, they didn't really think about how they're going to set themselves apart. And of course, you look at cannabis, it's a commodity. I mean, we used to pay $400 an ounce, and now sometimes it's $50. Of course, you get what you pay for.
Right.
So it blows my mind that nobody looked at that, and the fact that cannabis, you had to have a lot of qualifications and background checks. So it's a limited number, whereas CBD, anybody can jump in. So
Right.
it's so confusing for the consumer, and it makes me very upset. But I do want to talk about, so you offer CBD, CBG, CBC, and CBN.
More than that. We have CBDHQ, which is one that very few people have heard about.
Right.
CBC is a new one that exists in oils that people have, but very recently we've isolated that. So yeah, CBG we had in 2015, brought early, and CBN. It's interesting. So CBG came into the market recently because farmers wanted access to something new that they could sell. And they said, and this is back to what you're talking about, people coming into the industry. It is confusing. It's a tough space because investors want to get involved, always have, and they need numbers, they need projections. And so they look at historical sales. The problem is they were looking at the wrong sales. They were looking at sales that existed between companies, amongst brokers to other brokers. They weren't looking at the amount of material that was translated through the finished product to the consumer. It was not based on consumer buying behaviors. And so they ended up saying, wow, this is a big potential. It wasn't near what they thought. Now, consumption is pretty big and it's growing, and the demand is huge still. But the amount of acreage that people grew was astronomical, and they didn't have outlets for it. Everyone thinks build it and they will come. And now what we see happening with CBG is the exact same thing that happened with CBD. When I first sold CBG, I mean, it was anywhere, the very first kilos were selling for $60,000. Now, keep in mind, I sold CBD for $60,000 a kilo way back when it started.
Yes.
Now, it's under $1,000.
Right.
So, and again, our technology improves, process improves. It's not like we were saying, oh, we can get away with that type of a markup. Costs have come down significantly. But the same thing happened with the CBG, and now you see these farmers selling their flower as fast as they can. Producers are grabbing it, and most of them that snatched it up have bought it now at a price higher than what the market's selling at. And
how do they make products with it? Again, they're just
that's the other problem, that they're realizing the market that existed was the interest of companies to buy and resell, primarily brokers and alike. And then when it lands in the hands of an actual manufacturer, the velocity that that moves is not very fast right now, because all of these products race to the bottom on CBD. These companies can't afford to put other cannabinoids in their products now.
Right.
So the consumer's not getting an array of options related to controlled spectrum products.
Yep.
Because the companies have to completely rebrand, and they're doing that right now. And some of them are, hanging their hats. But it's interesting what happens. And the flood of CBD is actually what incited CBN next, because CBN is now being created through a conversion process of CBD. And
oh, really?
yeah,
Okay.
so I mean, you can do it THCA to CBNA.
Right.
There's a few methods of doing it. It's not as simple as adding heat, and a lot of these people like to think. There's more involved.
Just decarboxylate it further.
Correct. It's not an absolute process.
Right.
But all this overabundance of CBD isolate had to go somewhere, and people realized quickly, let's convert it.
Got it. Yep.
And so now the price of CBN is plummeting. The one that is not going down right now is CBC. And so we do
Who
have
else has it? I don't know anyone else has it.
not
really.
a lot of people. It's out there. Never say never, but very few.
Right.
And so the value, I guess, is going to maintain on that one for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, everything's going to come down to a price that stabilizes. A lot of the compliance that's happening is cleaning up the industry. It's forcing companies to operate with the licenses that are needed, for the type of manufacturer they are, whether they're a food manufacturer and the health department needs to audit them, whether they pursue supplement licensing, or whether they're actually working with OTC products, over-the-counter drugs, homeopathic or actual scheduled substances, and need to become drug manufacturers, which is very rare because you don't really want to invite the federal FDA into your facility as a cannabis company these days. So most companies are stopping at supplement. And that's good, but health departments are requiring not just that your facilities are audited and that your SOPs are in place,
Right.
but as a company, we're absolutely delighted, because for the very first time in this industry, we're starting to see regulators ask for chain of custody documents. Where did your materials come from?
That's right.
And
That's right.
we've had that in place for a long time, and we've been trying to help other companies get there. It wasn't until last year that we would even touch any U.S. materials.
Really?
Has nothing to do with quality. There's high quality manufacturers and labs and
It's
processes
just
here.
gray area. It was the gray area.
It was legality. I never wanted to be confined to a single state, much less a single country. Our company's name is not very creative. It's CBD Global, but we did it intentionally. We did it for SEO purposes. We knew it was simple enough, and we are a global company. And the fact that we have the chain of custody that we do gives us the ability to export and import into other countries that won't touch U.S. materials. So it's helpful to have that.
I want to interrupt because you're in 3 universities, 17 countries, and you have 600 wholesale customers.
Yeah.
You also white label.
Yeah.
But what I want to talk about, which is a hot topic now, nano, what does that mean? And you do miscible? Is that how you say it? Miscible? Miscible. So that's kind of a new word on the street now. Everyone thinks, no one else is doing it. So can you kind of talk about those two things?
Yeah. So miscible just means water miscible, and it means it's miscibilized in water. Miscible is the proper term that should have always been in place of soluble. These molecules are not soluble in water.
No.
Period.
Right.
They suspend within water based on an emulsification process, which is your typical application that's being used in the space. And unfortunately, people are applying the word nano to it. In most cases, it is anything but nano. However, even if it is nano, and nano is defined by the Fed and by the FDA, by the scientific community, is anything under 100 nanometers in size.
Okay.
To give some context, the average cannabinoid cluster is about 2,000 nanometers in size. And the reason I say cluster is these are lipophilic, oil-based molecules. So when they get into a water-based environment like your body, they clump together. They aggregate, agglomerate together. So when they agglomerate together, the average particle size is around 2,000 nanometers. And so people wanted to figure out how to get this into water-based solutions for two reasons. One, you want to be able to make products that are water-based, foods, drinks, things like that. Very good technologies that have been around for a very long time. Be very careful of people using the word proprietary. This
industry disruptor.
Yeah, they've been around. Yeah, exactly. They've been around for a while. The only thing that hasn't been around and is not well known and is fairly unique is what we refer to as true nano. And we had to put the word true in front of it in order to dissociate it from the buzzword nano. It's one of many.
And you copyright it, right?
We trademarked true nano because, and I want to be clear with the audience that when I use the term true nano and I speak of its benefits, I'm being very true and objective about it. But at the same time, I have a bias because we sell this product, and I want to always be clear about biases because that's important for people to know. We do use emulsifications for getting these molecules into water-based solutions. These emulsifications are not the true nano. They're the common ones you see in the industry. And they'll bring a particle size down to an average of 60 to 120 nanometers.
So encapsulated into something, right?
Yeah, so
right?
It's so you encapsulate it in a lipid bilayer. You can do a single layer, and so this is the differences between the encapsulation technologies, which is either a micelle technology or a liposomal technology. There's very few companies doing liposomal. There's a very good company out in Broomfield, Colorado. They've been using liposomal technology for some time. Quicksilver Scientific, Christopher Shade is the CEO. He's a very intelligent guy. He's great. I wish he would do more speaking in the industry because we would all benefit.
Maybe I'll get him on.
You should.
Great.
He'd be of value. The trouble, and I'll let him refute what I'm about to say because it'll make for a great show. Liposomal technology historically is very hard to scale. Pharmaceutical companies don't use it for that reason. There are reactors that you utilize in order to create liposomal encapsulations. The particle size is much larger than a micelle, and it's historically used with biomarkers in order to target a very specific site in the body, and then it releases the active. Without that biomarker, I'll let Christopher maybe speak to it, but the benefits without that biomarker relieving a larger particle size, there's argument as to whether it's even necessary. And so you could utilize a micelle technology with it's a smaller particle size, and it will help. The reason people are doing it is because they want a smaller particle to help with bioavailability, which is absorption into the body.
Right.
There's an important difference between effectiveness of something, which people don't talk about a lot in the space, which is the difference between bioavailability and bioefficacy.
Yeah.
So availability is the absorption rate. Efficacy is what's its mode of action once it gets into the body.
So is that bioactivity synonymous with bioactivity?
So there's very different things. Absorption has nothing to do with the effectiveness once it gets into the body. In most cases, especially if you're ingesting it, a lot of times these micelles are ripped apart and the lipophilic molecules go right back to aggregation and back to their original particle size.
Right.
They get metabolized and processed like anything else, so it's a potential wasted cost. Now, it was good to get into a soft drink or something that you wanted, good application, but not so much about increased effectiveness.
Right.
So, and then in the bloodstream there as well, a lot of times when you have these technologies, they don't stay in that particle size.
Right. Okay.
And that's the big difference between other nanotechs that don't utilize emulsification and ours. We have a final step that actually will lock in the particle size and keep it from going back to its original size. The technology that we use that is not an emulsification allows us to obtain a particle size of less than 7 nanometers.
Wow.
It's almost breaking the picometer threshold. We don't have any interest of even trying to go lower because at our particle size, this technology has the ability to penetrate any cellular membrane in the body. My ability to access and use this technology with its owners took over a year of them evaluating the cleanliness of our products. Because nano typically either has two challenges. To people who understand it, it scares them. To people who don't understand it, it's very difficult to market because you have to talk about the equivalent, bioequivalence, because you can't talk about milligrams nor normal delivery. The particle size is so small, you're now dealing with a math equation, which is basically a calculation of surface area. And that surface area calculation, the best analogy I can come up with is think of nano. Nano is to a meter, is 1/1000th of a meter.
Okay.
So nanometer is to a meter as a marble is to the size of the earth.
Oh my God.
That's how small it is. Now, when you think about it, a 2000 nanometer particle size of a typical cannabinoid cluster comes into the bloodstream. And then if you want to see what is its fate, its target of interest, let's just say, CBD has been shown to help with immune support. And the way that it can help with that is in a number of ways. Vitamin D is very helpful for immunity too, kind of like iron needing to bind with hemoglobin in order to carry oxygen through the blood. You have to have those two things in order for oxygen to actually be carried. Vitamin D works similarly on the VDR receptor. It needs to bind in order for your macrophage or T cells to basically see what's happening. Without that ability, they fly blind and they can't identify the difference between a healthy cell and an unhealthy cell. And the result of that is what we call autoimmunity problems. Right. So the body doesn't know the difference. That's it. It attacks itself.
Right.
So physicians prescribe vitamin D a lot, but a lot of times it's for naught because they don't realize that the person, an individual, may not have the ability to actually use the vitamin D. And that's from a polymorphism or some problem with the receptor. And we won't go into why those happen, but the reason this relates to cannabis is the vitamin D has been shown to piggyback and actually work in unison with the endocannabinoid system.
Wow.
And so although it is not a cure for a polymorphism, it is a treatment. It can be used as a treatment, and it can help activate an immune system. So
what you need right now.
We all do.
Because
right?
of the coronavirus. Well, especially now though, right? Build those immune systems up.
I'm not going to go into that topic. So it's that particle size is extremely important because if you have a very clean product, you can get total absorption into the body within 30 minutes. And you're not just confined to the areas that is being absorbed, say in a topical targeted location, or ingestion where it's going through the liver and being processed. This is the other. Yeah, a suppository is a very great way to get something into the body. It also has to be very clean. That's why it's heavily regulated by the FDA. It's considered a drug. A medical device. Depends on what's in it. It's considered a medical device. So there's a lot of great ways to get things into the body. The nanotech, the true nanotech, is wonderful because it doesn't use, in order to encapsulate itself, it actually uses the water cluster. So the technology we use has two parts, a water technology and a particle technology, and we reduce the particle size of both. We will break covalent bonds between hydrogen and oxygen atoms, and then we re-encapsulate the reduced particle size of the cannabinoids molecules. Once encapsulated, that breaking of those hydrogen and oxygen bonds allows us to remove water memory. which is a very interesting topic if you have time to get into. Water memory is held in all water. Water picks up information and it holds that information and it transmutes it wherever it goes. This goes a little bit into Ayurvedic medicine and frequency technology, but that is a portion of what we do. And what you can do is use Schumann waves, Solfeggio frequencies, and what you can do is lock in a very specific resonance pattern, which will determine what the geometry structure is of the water cluster encapsulating the active molecule. And then it takes the water, your body will take the water in because it sees it as water. And the particle that's inside, it doesn't even notice it. And so water acts as a Trojan horse, getting this active into your body. And you know, it's a very, very quick mechanism of action, and people have had all kinds of great experiences using that product.
So I think what people are wondering out there is, how do I afford your products with all this studies and, you know, all of this research and what you've done here to come up with all of those? How do you, you know, what are your prices like for people that are out there that are very interested?
They're competitive. They're not that different. So again, the thing that's allowed us to really control our prices is the fact that our supply chain is vertically integrated. And so we have exclusive relationships all the way to that seed in the farm. The farms that grow our genetics grow just the crops that we utilize. And so that's all processed in Prague in the Czech Republic. And raw materials come to CBD Global in the United States. We manufacture products for other companies, and then we do our own as well. But
no middleman, which cuts out, or the three middleman, maybe, as you said. There could be brokers participating.
So that's all cut out. We do work with other companies in the United States in a number of capacities. A lot of our relationships are mutual. We have customers who sometimes are vendors and vendors who are sometimes customers. But we have very strict requirements for people that we do work with in the United States. And only until last year were we able to start getting companies to the point where they could fulfill the documentation requirements that we demand of anything that enters our building, which is good news.
Instant credibility, though. Instant credibility, right?
It is. And it's good to see companies starting to take that seriously and do it. And it's great for them because, well, it's a requirement. The state's actually auditing companies and asking for that information now.
So, okay, so I'm on your website. It's interesting because what you did is you took the approach of science and studies where other people took the approach of, okay, how can my brand look better than everybody else? You know, the greatest, the this, the that. You also don't make medical claims, which obviously is very important. But your next gen formats, you have high-speed flowable powders, water miscible powders and liquids, true nano. You have terpenes. I mean, the list goes on and on. Certain brands that you have of your own. You do white labeling solutions, private label, pretty much anything in this space you do. And it's just so impressive, Scott. And I know we need to wrap up now. I could talk to you for 4 hours, but let's finish with the cartoon series.
Okay. The cartoons were illustrated by Rich Moyer, who was a famous artist that worked for Mad Magazine.
Oh, Mad! I remember that.
Yeah. He's done a lot of things. I don't want to undersell him, but you can Google him. He's actually local here in Denver. He does a lot of children's books and other things. We contracted him to help us with this campaign, which started from internal office jokes amongst our staff, where the only way I think to keep your sanity in this industry with all the challenges get thrown at us between banking and changing laws, things like that, you have to have humor. You have to be able to make fun of yourself. And you have to be able to just make light of the difficult challenges that you're going to face. And the best way to bring education and awareness into the industry, we thought was through humor because, you know, it's distasteful to point fingers. You don't want to do that.
Sure.
But it's hard because you're in a position where you say, how do we talk about these things without being negative? Because they're negative. And
They
there's a
are
lot of
negative.
bad behavior.
Yes, sir.
So everyone kind of zips their lips, and it doesn't help the consumer.
Nope.
Businesses want to talk about it, but no one wants to wear the scarlet letter.
Right.
So the best way that we figured we could do it to help consumers is to start a humor campaign. And we call it the Had Enough Yet campaign. And the reason we call it the Had Enough Yet campaign is that the very first cartoon we put out, which was the conception of the entire campaign, was a term that I came up with over 3 years ago in our office when we started to see the merchandising behavior come into this space with every industry getting involved, wanting to be a part of CBD, CBD, CBD. Those 3 letters became so obnoxious to hear, and it's in my company logo, big and bold.
Right.
And it frustrates companies in this space because a lot of people are doing good work and they're trying to make great products and help people. But then now you have bed sheets and yoga pants and candles and diffusers, pillows. It's obnoxious. And now we see an environment where the consumer is getting turned off. And what's going to happen that we fear is they're going to get so irritated by this wave of merchandising that they're going to put it off before they ever have a chance to find products that actually can help them and their families for their needs. So we wanted to help fight that. And so we said, look, we're not the police. We're not trying to say a good product from a bad product, but it's okay to have a conversation to say, if you have a headache, are you putting yoga pants on to get your ibuprofen? I don't think that's the approach someone wants to go.
After that.
So that's why we created the cartoons. You can find them all. We have a press release coming out to announce this pandemic that has hit the United States. It's called CBD PDS, pixie dust syndrome. And it's defined by the compulsive act of sprinkling CBD into any random product you can find, simply so you can merchandise those 3 letters for pursuing CB dollar bills, y'all. So
that's right. That's right.
We have that press release coming out, and we all on the website that you can see is hadenough.io. And if you go to that website, you can see the press release, and we actually have a banner of products on the top. And these are not hypothetical products. These are real products in the market. And we're going to keep
polish.
Yeah.
Toilet paper. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I will also be participating. I love this idea. So I will be posting the cartoon.
We appreciate that.
I already put the first one out there, but what a creative way to help the consumer understand that, look, it's a serious thing. It can definitely help you medically. Yeah. However, be careful and make sure that you know where your product, your seed is coming from all the way to the product, and do your due diligence. I am sorry, we have to wrap up. Scott, I will definitely have you on again.
Well, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
And anybody that needs to get a hold of Scott or his team, cbdglobalextracts.com, or you can email us at cultivate@cannabistech.com.
Thank you,
Thanks
Jennifer.
so much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Have a good day.
You too.